Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. An obsession is often described as a consuming fixation on a particular thought or desire that dominates a person's mind. This state can drive individuals to commit shocking and unpredictable acts, stripping away all mysticism and superstition. Such behavior is frequently linked to romantic obsession, an intense fixation on another person that pushes actions far beyond the bounds of rational thought. Typically, this kind of severe emotional and psychological disturbance develops gradually, culminating in the deterioration of the person's mental state, leading to impulsive and uncontrollable actions. The tragic and violent crime involving fitness trainer Leslie Reeves and musician Chris Smith in the fall of 2021 shook the quiet town of Farmersville, Illinois to its core. The couple appeared to have a bright future ahead, but their second date turned into a devastating event that claimed one life and permanently altered another. While the motive was apparent, it took investigators nearly 3 years to gather enough evidence to solve the case, nearly allowing the perpetrator to walk free. Chris Smith was born in 1973 in Hillsborough, the county seat of Montgomery County, Illinois. He was the oldest of 3 siblings in a close-knit and supportive family. Tragically, the family's father passed away early in their lives, leaving their mother Sharon to raise Chris and his younger sisters on her own. Sharon worked tirelessly to ensure her children had everything they needed. Chris pursued a solid education and eventually started a small business specializing in building swimming pools. The business was successful, allowing him to purchase a large home in the quiet rural town of Farmersville. However, his true passion was music. Chris was a talented guitarist with an exceptional singing voice, and he founded a country music band. The group performed in bars and clubs throughout the state, gaining a modest level of local fame, known for his friendly demeanor. Chris had no trouble staying out of legal trouble, refrained from using illegal substances, and showed little interest in alcohol. At the age of 32, Chris Smith got married, and a few years later, the couple welcomed their only daughter. However, after 15 years of marriage, their relationship began to fall apart, and they eventually separated. Despite the divorce, Chris and his ex-wife maintained a positive relationship for the sake of their daughter. He remained actively involved in her life, supported her financially, and often spent weekends and holidays with her. Chris was known by those around him as a kind, hardworking, and approachable man in his hometown. He was something of a local celebrity. Everyone recognized him, and his band's performances always attracted a full house. Naturally, his talent and good looks made him popular with women. But a year after his divorce, Chris was still single and not rushing into new relationships. That changed one October evening in 2021 when he met the charming Leslie Reeves at a local bar. Leslie Abigail Reeves was also a native of Hillsborough. Born in 1977, she earned a degree in a technical field, though she never worked in her profession. Leslie was drawn to creative pursuits. She was deeply passionate about dance and taught yoga at a fitness club. Leslie, like Chris, had experienced an unsuccessful marriage. Her relationship ended due to her ex-husband's aggressive behavior, which had made her fear for her safety. This prompted her to file for divorce and take up martial arts to ensure she could protect herself in the future. Leslie eventually earned a certification as a self-defense instructor and began teaching women's self-defense classes. She was described as sweet, outgoing, and compassionate, someone who couldn't walk past someone in need without offering help. Leslie was raising her children on her own as her ex-husband provided no support. Despite her struggles, she remained hopeful that she would one day meet someone worthy of her trust and affection. Unfortunately, her dating life was far from smooth. Shortly before meeting Chris, Leslie had ended a toxic relationship with a controlling and aggressive partner on Saturday, October 30th, 2021. After finishing work, Leslie decided to unwind at one of the city's popular night spots that evening. A local band, led by Chris Smith as its founder and vocalist, was performing. Chris couldn't help but notice a stunning blonde in the crowd with a dazzling smile. After his set, he approached her and offered to buy her a drink. The two hit it off instantly, discovering a shared love for music and a natural connection that kept them talking late into the night. By the time they parted ways, it felt to both like they'd known each other forever. They exchanged phone numbers and started talking daily. However, their busy work schedules and the fact that they lived in different towns made it hard to meet again. Finally, on November 20th, Chris called Leslie and suggested they meet for Thanksgiving at the same bar where they'd first met to ensure they'd have a spot on the busy holiday evening. He reserved a table in advance, knowing it would be nearly impossible to find a free one. Otherwise, Leslie Reeves was thrilled and eagerly accepted Chris's invitation to meet. She shared the news of the upcoming date with her close friend Nana, confidently declaring that she had found the man of her dreams, someone she could see herself building a life with. Leslie seemed deeply infatuated, filled with happiness, and excitedly prepared for the evening. Though she admitted to feeling a little nervous, Nana encouraged Leslie to stay in touch throughout the night, just in case anything unexpected happened. Leslie agreed to send updates. Although she was certain everything would go perfectly, she had no doubts about Chris and believed the evening would turn out wonderfully. At the scheduled time, the couple met at the same bar where they had first encountered each other. 3 weeks earlier, Leslie looked stunning, and the two had a fantastic time together. Other patrons noticed the lively and happy couple engrossed in conversation, radiating joy and enjoying each other's company as planned. Leslie periodically messaged Nana to keep her updated about how the date was going around 11 p.m. Leslie texted to say she and Chris were heading to his home in Farmersville, about 60 miles from the bar. At Nana's insistence, Leslie shared the address with her just in case, but reassured her that everything was fine. They were both adults after all. Nana went to bed that night feeling confident that her friend was safe and the date had gone as planned. However, she didn't hear her phone buzz around 1:30 a.m. when she received a chilling message from Leslie. The text consisted of just one word: help. The next morning, Nana saw the message and immediately tried to contact Leslie. Her calls and texts went unanswered. Growing increasingly worried, Nana decided to act since she had Chris's home address. She got in her car and drove to Farmersville. While on the way, she called the local authorities, fearing that something terrible might have happened to Leslie. At that point, Nana suspected that Chris might have done something to her friend, or was holding her against her will. The drive to Chris's farmhouse took Nana just over an hour. When she arrived, she saw another car pulling up at the same time. The driver was a young man named Jeffrey. A friend and bandmate of Chris's, Jeffrey explained that he hadn't been able to reach Chris all morning and decided to stop by to check on him together. Nana and Jeffrey circled the house, peering through the windows, trying to figure out what was going on inside. When they reached the back door, they noticed shattered glass and a broken lock. Someone had clearly forced their way in. But where were the homeowner and his guest, the young man? Jeffrey went inside first, while Nana waited outside. The house was eerily quiet, and there were signs of disarray. As Jeffrey ventured further, he saw a figure lying motionless on the floor in a dark pool. Shocked, he immediately ran back outside. He and Nana decided to call emergency services right away, reporting what they had found without disturbing the scene or attempting to check further themselves. When law enforcement and paramedics arrived at the farmhouse, they discovered 2 victims with gunshot wounds. Tragically, the woman had already passed away and showed no signs of life. However, to everyone's surprise, the man, despite significant blood loss and a severe head injury, was still alive. His pulse was faint, but he was breathing. Emergency responders rushed him to the nearest hospital. Though doctors gave little hope for his survival, given the extent of his injuries, initial theories suggested that the couple had returned to Chris's home, where an argument had escalated into physical aggression. It was thought that at some point Chris retrieved a firearm, resulting in a violent struggle where his guest was killed and he sustained critical injuries. However, this theory was quickly ruled out. First, the weapon used in the crime was not found at the scene, indicating it had been taken by the perpetrator. Second, clear evidence of forced entry was discovered at the back door, where the glass was shattered and the lock broken. This suggested an intruder had entered the home, catching the couple off guard. The state of the house also indicated a struggle. Items were scattered throughout, but nothing of value was taken, ruling out robbery as a potential motive. Autopsy reports later revealed that both Leslie and Chris had suffered a single gunshot wound to the head. Leslie's body was found in the kitchen. Where it appeared she had attempted to hide, the refrigerator had been pushed out of place, and a bullet hole was visible in its side. The kitchen door had been broken down, indicating that Leslie had likely tried to barricade herself. Inside, by using the refrigerator to block the entrance, tragically, her efforts were unsuccessful. In the living room, investigators found an open bottle of wine and 2 glasses on a small table. Meanwhile, a burnt pizza was discovered still smoking in the oven. The scene made it clear that the couple had been preparing for a romantic evening with no expectation of an intruder disrupting their plans. Chris had a dog named Tiki, a loyal companion who played a critical role in the aftermath of the attack throughout the night. Tiki stayed by his injured owner's side, keeping him warm and covering the wound on his head. Investigators later concluded that the dog's actions significantly reduced Chris's blood loss, ultimately saving his life. When Nana learned of her close friend, Leslie's tragic death, her first action was to contact Leslie's family and inform them of the devastating news. Meanwhile, Jeffrey called Chris's mother, Sharon, and told her that her son was in critical condition in the hospital, overcome with fear that they might not see him alive. Sharon and her younger daughter immediately set out for the hospital where Chris had been taken. The doctors operated on Chris for several hours but were unable to remove the bullet lodged in his head. It was positioned between the brain hemispheres, and any attempt to extract it carried a high risk of fatal complications. The medical team decided to leave the bullet in place, focusing instead on stabilizing his condition. Chris had lost a significant amount of blood, was extremely weak, and was placed in a medically induced coma to reduce stress on his body and allow him a chance to recover. As the sole survivor, Chris was a vital witness who could potentially identify the attacker without his testimony. It would be incredibly difficult to piece together the events of that fateful night. However, his condition remained critical, and doctors refrained from making any optimistic predictions. Both Chris and Leslie were known as calm, level-headed individuals who avoided conflicts, had no known enemies, and had never been involved in any trouble. They maintained amicable relationships with their former spouses, and it seemed as though neither had anyone with ill intentions toward them. However, Nana was the first to suggest that Leslie's ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr, could be the only person with a motive to harm her. Leslie had met Robert online about a year earlier, and their initial connection had been strong. Robert, like Leslie, was divorced and had 2 children from different relationships. His eldest daughter was the same age as Leslie's for nearly 2 months. The two exchanged messages and phone calls before deciding to meet in person. Though they began dating, Leslie quickly realized that Robert was not the kind of man she wanted to build a life with. Robert had a volatile temper and displayed controlling and aggressive behavior. He sought to dominate Leslie, demanding that everything be done his way. What he failed to account for was that Leslie was a strong and independent woman who refused to let anyone manipulate her. After 6 months, Leslie made the decision to end the relationship, informing Robert in person. However, he was unwilling to let her go and began to stalk her. He constantly called, sent her dozens of messages every day, and appeared at places he knew she frequented. Leslie was not overly concerned about his behavior, believing she could handle herself if necessary. By October, Robert's behavior had grown increasingly obsessive. Leslie blocked him on all messaging apps and social media platforms, refusing to answer his attempts to reach her. Despite her efforts, Robert acted as though they were still a couple, becoming consumed by his fixation on her. Leslie's friends expressed concern about his behavior, but she remained calm, confident in her ability to protect herself. Another close friend of Leslie's, a woman named Emma, also pointed to Robert Tarr as the primary suspect. Emma corroborated that Robert had been stalking Leslie and posed a genuine threat. She provided police with Robert's home address as well as the address of his ex-wife, hoping these leads would help in the investigation. When police officers arrived at Robert Tarr's home, he appeared unsurprised and didn't even ask why they were there. He remained calm and did not request a lawyer. During questioning, Robert claimed that he and Leslie had never truly broken up, though he admitted their relationship had recently become strained. Robert viewed Leslie's connection with Chris Smith as an act of betrayal. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in the crime at Chris's farmhouse. He stated that he had never been to Farmersville, didn't know Chris's address, and had spent Thanksgiving evening with his eldest daughter, Shelby, who could confirm his alibi. According to Robert, he had picked up his daughter around 5 p.m. From her mother's house in the suburbs, they went shopping, stopped for ice cream at a mall cafe, and then returned to his home in Hillsborough. Robert's account was disjointed and inconsistent, and his alibi seemed unconvincing. Investigators brought in his 16-year-old daughter Shelby to provide a detailed timeline of her day with her father. Shelby confirmed that her dad picked her up around 5 p.m. and that they spent about an hour walking around before heading to his house once home. Robert suggested ordering pizza and anything else she wanted, but shortly after he told Shelby he needed to step out for a while. He left around 6:30 p.m. and returned roughly 90 minutes later. Shelby noted that her father seemed deeply upset, was crying, but didn't explain why she went to bed close to midnight, but was woken up around 3:30 a.m. by the sound of the washing machine running. Shelby described how her father paced back and forth, claiming he couldn't sleep. Forensic investigators had already determined that the shooting at Chris's home occurred around 1:30 a.m. Leaving Robert without a solid alibi during the critical time frame, detective theorized that Robert had learned about Leslie's planned date with Chris. After dropping off his daughter at his home, he drove to the bar where Leslie and Chris were spending the evening, witnessing them together. Reportedly shattered him emotionally, according to the working theory. Robert returned home briefly, but waited for Shelby to fall asleep. He then retrieved a firearm, drove back to the bar, and followed Leslie and Chris as they left, trailing them all the way to Chris's house in Farmersville. Robert did not act immediately, but instead observed the couple through the windows, watching them enjoy their evening together. Overcome with rage, he eventually forced his way into the house and carried out the attack after the crime. Robert returned home and began destroying evidence. Shelby reported that he spent much of the early morning hours washing clothes with an excessive amount of chemicals, which investigators later linked to an attempt to remove incriminating traces. A search warrant for Robert Tarr's home was obtained the same day. During the search, detectives found a firearm which they showed to Shelby. However, she stated she had never seen that weapon before, and noted that her father owned a completely different gun, which she could only describe in vague terms, ballistic tests. Later confirmed that the firearm found in Robert's home did not match the weapon used in the crime. Investigators then focused on tracing Robert's movements that night. Surveillance cameras along the route to Farmersville captured his car multiple times. Additionally, he had stopped at a gas station along the highway. While he paid in cash, 2 employees confidently identified him as the driver of the vehicle. Although there was no direct evidence tying Robert to the crime, the circumstantial evidence was mounting. The decision was made to arrest him, while further investigation continued. When Robert was placed in custody, Chris's family felt a sense of relief, fearing that the perpetrator might otherwise attempt to ensure the key witness. Chris never regained consciousness. Robert immediately secured a high-profile attorney who saw the case as a career-defining opportunity. The defense lawyer gave interviews to several news outlets, asserting his client's innocence and confidently predicting that Robert would soon be released. Faced with mounting evidence that placed him in Farmersville on the night of the crime, Robert's version of events began to shift. He claimed that Leslie had called him from the bar and asked for a ride to a friend's house in another town. According to Robert, he agreed to drive her and dropped her off at the address she provided. He said he then returned home, where he became emotional, suspecting her of being unfaithful, but insisted he had no intention of harming her or anyone else. This new story raised numerous red flags. The timeline Robert provided did not align with surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, or even his own daughter's statements. When confronted with these inconsistencies, Robert claimed he had deliberately avoided telling Shelby where he was going that night because she didn't get along with Leslie. However, Shelby's own testimony contradicted this. During her interview, she described Leslie as a kind and pleasant person. Meanwhile, Robert's attorney continued to argue that his client was innocent. He pointed out that no traces of blood, broken glass, or other incriminating evidence had been found in Robert's vehicle. The lawyer emphasized that all accusations against Robert were based on circumstantial evidence and demanded that his client be released from custody under supervised conditions. Shelby provided a critical lead to law enforcement when she mentioned that her father had a hidden stash in a utility room located in the backyard. Following her tip, investigators searched the area and found a firearm buried in the dirt floor of the storage cellar. The weapon was wrapped in heavy-duty plastic. Ballistic analysis confirmed that this gun was used in the shooting of Chris and Leslie. Although Robert had wiped his fingerprints from the weapon, he overlooked the plastic wrapping, which still carried traces of his fingerprints. Additionally, microscopic blood particles matching Leslie's DNA were found on the firearm, likely deposited when the attacker fired at close range. Robert appeared visibly surprised at how quickly the police had located the weapon, but he wasted no time concocting an explanation. He claimed that the gun belonged to Leslie, who had been practicing shooting for self-defense, according to Robert. Leslie brought him the wrapped firearm a few days prior and asked him to hide it without providing further details. While this explanation addressed the presence of Leslie's DNA, Robert was unable to explain how bullets fired from this weapon ended up in both victims. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence and the inconsistencies in Robert's statements, proving his guilt remained a challenge. The investigation was stalling, and Robert's lawyer was preparing to celebrate a legal victory. In this high-profile case, the prosecution's hopes rested on Chris, who was still in a coma. Though his condition was gradually improving, the prosecution believed that if Chris regained consciousness, he could provide critical testimony about what had happened in his home that night. Robert, on the other hand, feared that Chris might survive and implicate him in desperation. Robert attempted to hire a fellow inmate to ensure Chris never had the chance to speak Robert off his cellmate, who was due for release soon, $100,000, to infiltrate the hospital and harm Chris. While he remained in a coma, as a gesture of good faith, Robert allegedly provided an upfront payment of $10,000. However, instead of carrying out the plan, the cellmate went directly to investigators and revealed Robert's plot. Authorities immediately increased security around Chris's hospital room, assigning round-the-clock guards to prevent any attempts to harm him. Meanwhile, Robert denied the accusations, claiming that his cellmate was fabricating the story and that he had never offered anyone money or sought to hire anyone for such a task. In January 2022, 2 months after the incident, Chris finally emerged from his coma. Unfortunately, his recovery brought little progress to the investigation. To the immense disappointment of detectives, Chris could not remember any details of the night in question. He didn't even recall Leslie or recognize her name. Chris struggled to comprehend his surroundings, was in significant pain, and experienced severe memory loss, leaving him unable to provide the testimony investigators so desperately needed. The man had to relearn how to walk, speak, and form coherent thoughts. He was unable to move independently, as the left side of his body was almost completely paralyzed, and he required constant care provided by his mother and sisters. The trial for Robert Tarr was scheduled for March 2024. During this time, Chris Smith continued his rehabilitation, slowly making physical progress, but his memory of the night in question never returned. Chris declined to participate in the court proceedings, explaining that he couldn't provide any helpful testimony and that the process could be emotionally traumatic and detrimental to his recovery. Although there was still no direct evidence against Robert, the prosecution highlighted his OBS session with Leslie, as described by her friends and family. Witnesses testified that Robert had stalked. Leslie monitored her movements and refused to accept that she had ended their relationship. Robert reportedly viewed her date with Chris as both a betrayal and a personal insult, leading him to take drastic and violent action. According to the prosecution, Robert had followed the couple throughout the evening. While they enjoyed their time at the bar, Robert returned home to retrieve his firearm. He then tracked them to Farmersville and broke into Chris's home, catching them off guard. Despite Leslie's years of martial arts training, her skills were no match for a gun. She attempted to barricade herself in the kitchen, while Chris tried to stop the intruder, but both suffered gunshot wounds to the head. Tragically, Leslie's injury was fatal. Robert's defense attorney argued vigorously for his client's innocence, emphasizing the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the absence of a direct eyewitness willing to testify, and accusations of bias on the part of the prosecution. Despite these efforts, in October 2024, Robert Tarr was found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 85 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 70 years. This effectively ensured that Robert would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.